Calvin Castine on the Salmon River Road.
Yes, it is.
That's where we are. I don't know where I am. Salmon River Road.
Got lost in the detour.
Am I in Schuyler Falls, Plattsburgh, Peru? Where am I?
Schuyler Falls.
In Schuyler Falls. Okay. You're right on the border, though, as I recall.
Peru School District, Plattsburgh Mail District. There we go.
The town of Schuyler Falls, where you pay your
That's where we pay our taxes.
taxes.
Yeah,
All right,
okay.
that's the important part. We're here at the headquarters. On the top, no, not on the top floor. Next
We're on
to
the
the top
ground-
floor.
We're letting you in on the ground floor, Calvin.
We're in the basement here at the Bloated Toe. What's the official name? Bloated Toe
Bloated Toe
Publication
Enterprises.
Enterprises. Not just publications; they got enterprises
We're
besides that.
enterprising.
Okay, and this is not, even though it's enterprises, this is not Captain Kirk and Lieutenant O'Hara. This is Larry Gooley and Jill Jones,
Good job.
the boss, and
That's right.
our number one. And we're here to talk about. I have no idea what we're here to talk about. Judy's on the camera. She always makes sure I have to include that. It's the 16th day of May, 2018, and I enjoy coming here because all I have to do is introduce it, and
And Larry starts
then
talking.
Larry starts talking, and 2 hours later, we're out the door. So, Larry, what are we going to talk about
I've
today?
hardly said anything
Now he's
yet.
tongue-tied.
All right. Well, we were going to look at projects that we did last year, first of all.
In 2017.
Yes. And this book here is one of the ones that we did. You want-
I'll hold it up
Yeah,
here.
hold that for Judy.
There we go.
That's by Kathleen Larkin. Kathy Larkin and her partner Jane Zilka are good friends of ours. Came to us through word of mouth, other projects that we had done in the Adirondacks for other authors. And if I could show you, I'll just slide in front of that. This is the first book she did. We didn't design that cover, but that book was produced by us. And she was very pleased with it. And they live down on the Jersey Shore. And years ago, they came up on a vacation in the Adirondacks, and they just fell in love with the place. So on one of their trips up north, they saw this barn at Indian Lake, and they began to inquire about it, and they ended up purchasing it. And that's what you see on the cover here. They developed that into a business.
All right,
It's a
Through
beautiful-
These Doors, it's
Yep.
called.
Yep, and it's their business is called Abenaki Studios. They collect all sorts of antiques through the winter down in their area, you know, in New Jersey, New York City area, and then they'll come up north and sell them in their shop. And they also have plenty of workshops that are self-improvement things, or sometimes how to make a canoe paddle, a lot of you know, mountain-oriented stuff.
Okay, even though it's called Abenaki, it really has nothing to do with Native American, or does it?
No, well,
No, it's on Lake Abenaki.
Lake Abenaki is one
Oh.
of the lakes right there at Indian Lake. So.
Aha.
Yep. So, you know, we produced this book and we became good friends with them. And then Kathy decided to write a second book. She really enjoyed the process, and she's an excellent writer. I think they're both school teachers, right, Joe?
Yes.
Yeah, they were both school teachers. They're retired now. So they own the business, and they also own a house nearby at Indian Lake. So the second book, the title "Best of Both Worlds," fits very well because they love the Jersey Shore. They grew up in that area, and just as much they love the Adirondacks. And one of the key parts of this book is that they live at what became ground zero for Hurricane Sandy. What they say, the iconic picture of the
The roller coaster.
roller coaster in the water.
Maybe
They live
within a
just
mile.
within about a mile and a half or 2 miles of that.
Okay.
So there was massive destruction where they lived. And, you know, they went through a lot of rough times, but she writes about different people they met through running the business, different people they met there and in the Adirondacks, and also people who came to help. There were a lot of people in the Adirondacks. They took up collections. They did everything they could to help out. So she tells a lot of the story of what it was like going through all that.
So that's what this second book's about?
Yeah,
Best of Both Worlds?
Best of Both Worlds. And
Okay.
you know, she's a very good writer, and the stories are always interesting. Even you don't know the people, or there might be. She does have some stories of coming in contact with celebrities, but it's very interesting the way she writes. Engaging writer. She's very good.
Okay. Well, that gets us to a point where not everybody knows what Bloated Toe is to begin with.
Oh,
besides
right.
an awfully wonderful name for a business.
That's
So,
Larry's fault.
so, so Jill, we'll let you tell all the folks out there in
Oh, sure,
TV,
but
in the TV
You just
world.
said Larry does all the talking. What are you
I
putting
know that,
pressure
so
on
I
me
got to
for?
get you in here a little bit here.
Well,
What
our
is Bloated
existence
Toe?
was initially pretty much exclusively to publish his books. He wanted to do his Lion Mountain book, and we looked at different options and nothing really seemed to fit, so we decided we were going to do it ourselves. And of course, if you want to do that, if you want to do everything on the up and up, you've got to start an official business so you can do all the legal things like collect sales tax and all that good stuff. And
So you're a DBA or?
Yep.
Or,
yeah, our DBA is Bloated Toe Enterprises.
okay, so DBA is doing business as.
Yep, that's on file at Clinton County. You can check it out, Cal, if you don't believe me.
No.
So
It's going to be an investigation now.
We will
Call
check
Zerlo.
that.
Cal's going to be doing an
this.
in-depth
He
investigation.
does know John Zerlo.
So, anyway, the name, I'm sure we've told this on the show
Yeah,
before, but
the-
for those of you not familiar, Larry and I, not so much anymore since we're so busy, but we do a lot of hiking and mountain climbing, and our standard routine would be to zoom up a mountain really fast, get up on the top and just hang out, kick off our shoes and socks and sit in the sun and eat and whatever. So on one particular day there were a lot of black flies, and one good thing about being with Larry is the bugs really like him a lot, so they tend to stay off me and go to him, which is great. So anyway, he got some bug bites apparently on his feet and toes. So on the way down the mountain, typically he's more sure-footed than I am. He's usually way ahead of me to going down because I'm kind of pussyfooting along. But this day I'm ahead of him, and I'm thinking, what the, he's lollygagging back there, what's going on? So he kept kind of whining about his toe hurting or something, I don't know. He kept telling me to slow down. And then finally he says, really, my foot hurts, I've got a bloated toe. And it just so happened, this had nothing to do with book publishing or anything. We had just been sort of joking just before that about we should start our own business. I don't know what we would do, but we should start our own business. So when he said that, I said, oh, that's what we'll call our business. Now that was a good 2 years prior to when we actually started the business. So when we're getting going, he said, well, what are we going to call it? I said, well, Bloated Toe.
Yeah, you already
And he
said.
said, are you serious? I said, yeah.
Oh.
And of course he was reading books about publishing your own books, and they said, oh, you should call your company something like, Lawrence Gooley Publishing or something like that. But
So
no.
you can identify it. Don't do anything confusing like Bloated Toe.
Yeah, like Bloated Toe.
It's not
yeah.
confusing.
I
It's
have
just
2
kind
books on my desk.
it's just kind of
still,
gross and
And that's
disturbing.
what they say in the first chapter.
Mhm.
Make sure you name it something.
Anyway, no one ever forgets her name, though, do they?
Right. But one thing she didn't mention
Uh-huh.
is that when we came to the point where I was trying to produce my Lion Mountain book, it would have been my second book. Altona was the first.
Right, out on Flat Rock.
We came to that point, and the expense and everything else, and we were looking at putting siding on the house. So the decision was made, we're going with the siding. So I was going to publish in booklets. We were just putting it aside. But within a week or two, she just suddenly changed her mind. I guess that's a woman's prerogative. Or
Yes, it is.
Anyway, she just said, you're doing the book. So we reversed course, forget the siding, and that's how the business started.
You're welcome.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
see, give her credit, and she's very thankful.
You'd have,
You didn't get any sarcasm out of that, did you?
you'd have fresh siding, right? Instead of this.
No, we went with paint instead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's for the name Bloated Toe, but you are a publisher.
Primarily book publishing, yes.
Yeah, and most of your production have been, well, I can't say at this point most because you put out so many other things, but your own publications, and then you've done your own publications, but not necessarily stuff that you've written.
Right.
It's stuff that you've found that other people have written that you want to republish.
Yeah, a lot of historic Adirondack books that are out of print. They're not available in print anywhere, some of them. So we produce them here now.
Right, several years ago we acquired a book binding system so we can actually, for short run books, we can do our own printing and binding here. Otherwise we wouldn't have done it, because if you had to go through a printer and do, say, hundreds or thousands,
Yeah,
it just wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah, it's
Not
hard.
just from an investment standpoint, but from storage. I mean, half our house now is taken up with books, so there's very little room left for us. So we had to figure out a way, okay, how can we have more publications but not take up too much more space?
So you can, it's almost like printing them on demand is what.
Yeah.
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 I mean,
Close to
yeah, it depends on how well the book sells and then whether or not we have it in stores. I might print anywhere from half a dozen to 2 or 3 dozen, depending on what I think we need to keep up.
So this is kind of thick. This one here is there a limit?
Mm,
Now that was printed bound through our printer out in Illinois.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
yeah, if we're
If
doing
she
one
wanted it.
1,000 or 2,000 at a time, we have a printer that we go to, and we've been with them for several
Typically,
years.
anything that we sell, say over, say 100 or 150 a year, we will print through our printer, because they also recently added a digital printing option. They didn't used to have that, and I think the minimum run you used to have was 300, I believe. Now you can do, I think, as few as 50 with their digital process. This was done with their offset.
Now, this
because
one's
I think
thicker.
she wanted 500 or 750
Right.
copies, something like that.
Just as an example, this one's thicker than that one, but she produced a version of this book. This is the company book, but she produced this one in-house. This is a little
I think
over
our thickest.
She meaning Jill.
Jill
Yes.
and
Yes.
Mr.
I believe our
300
thickest book we've
pages
done so
roughly.
far is 308 pages. We did a reprint of Bessborough. That was the original name of Westport, New York.
Well, that's a large book, too,
And
7
that's,
by
it's
10.
300, yeah, it's 308 pages.
And it's 7 by 10.
The thickness is really, it's mostly constrained by the guillotine cutter that trims the books down to size, because that has, only so much clearance. So that's probably the biggest limitation on thickness. Of course, too much thickness can also be unwieldy for people to read and hold, and for me to try to get it bound and everything, so.
That's why I've never read War of the Worlds.
Yeah, it's just, who can hold the book up for that long?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, we don't want to hold you up here, Larry.
Oh, no.
Feel free to.
All right, well, this is
You
another...
promised him 2 hours of talking time, and now look how much we've taken up.
This is another project that we did last year. The title, When We Becomes I, period, then again, period. Now, it seems confusing when you first read it, but when you understand what the subject matter is, the author is pictured on the cover.
Living
And-
Life and Death.
Yes. She married, like someone else I know, she married someone 17 or 18 years older than she was. They had a very good life together, and but because he was that much older, when in old age he became ill, his health started to really fade, and she was still in fine shape. They used to do a lot of mountain stuff and outdoor things. And they finally found that his condition was terminal. So for the last 14...
Among other things, he had vascular dementia.
Yeah. But, still aware a lot of the time. I know you've dealt with it, and we have as well. So he was a doctor, and he did not want to go out the way he saw other people go out. He wanted to mostly be at home, and that meant that his wife would be his caregiver. And, it's not something, well, for better or worse, so we all sign up for it, I
So
guess.
get some help.
So she went through a lot, and so did he during the last 14 months of his life. He was hospitalized a few times, but as soon as he was able to go home, it was back home, and then she took care of everything. It was difficult to deal with. She was looking to other people for some guidance, and keeping a journal was one thing suggested, and she did start to keep a journal. So after he passed, friends had told her that, you really should write a book. You've got a lot of good material here, and it might be helpful to people in similar situations, and there are a lot of people like that. And that's what this project is. So you can see how the title makes sense, because she was I, and then they became we, and everything was the two of them together. Jill and I are very similar. In fact, as I talked to her, she came up here to meet with us first before deciding to work with us. But, I recognize our situation there. Well, of course, unlike her situation, Jill says, I'll just pull the plug. Don't worry. There won't be any waiting period.
If I hear a gunshot, I'll
So
know.
I'm not really, I won't be suffering into old age.
Okay, so husband was Dr. Nathaniel Than Selleck?
Yeah, unusually, yeah, she called him Fan.
Yes, we've got a son named Nathaniel, and he goes by Nate, but this
Yeah.
guy went by Than.
Yes.
And her name is Eileen? Or
Emily. Emily Selleck.
Emily...
Pioneer Selleck.
Selleck.
Okay.
Like Tom Selleck.
I like Tom Selleck, but...
Yep. So they owned a place in the Adirondacks near Keene, and that's where they lived. So after he died, she still had a lot of friends there, and she has since moved out west and accumulated friends there as well.
Well, they had one son together, and he had lived out there somewhere in Idaho.
So
So she moved out there to be closer to him.
it's just, like work becomes personal with us, and we know what it's like. Your book is your baby. Well, that's what it was like with her, and it was also very personal because it's a story of, she told her life story in there, intertwined with his, and then goes to the journal entries, and it's very touching and poignant, but difficult at times. But it prepares people for what to expect, how difficult it can be, and that you can get through it.
Okay, is this one that you printed? Or
No,
or
there's
got sent out?
as well.
Yeah.
So,
Because I think she wanted, I believe we did 1,000 copies of that.
1,000 copies.
Yeah.
I've been involved a little bit in getting some books out, and 1,000 copies is really a good amount to get rid of.
Yes, it is.
So how are these people distributing their books? What do they do?
Well, we do advise them that, first of all, it's not turning business away, but the first thing I do is warn anyone who writes to us and wants to publish a book. It's very difficult self-publishing because you're going to produce it. Then if you don't know how to advertise or market or sell, these are all things you have to do. And, we know many authors. We go to some events every year. We know, and we've worked with a lot of them, and a lot of them will say, I have so many boxes of books sitting in my basement, and that's what you want to avoid.
Yeah.
So, it's more costly to produce a lower amount of, like say 500 books.
More costly per book.
Yes,
Right.
because you pay a setup fee, and after that point, you're paying mostly for labor and ink, cover stock, and paper. So if you ordered, say, 500 copies, maybe it might cost you $8 a copy. But if you ordered 1,000, it might cost you only $4 a copy. So you've got this number you've got to fight within your head. Will I be able to sell them? And it's something that I deal with every time as well. How many should I do? Personally, I feel like I have to sell 1,000 of each book that I designate for 1,000. Some of my books, they're side projects, and I expect to sell maybe a few hundred. I'm not really out there pushing them, but they add income all the
Right.
time to
Yeah.
what the main sellers are.
Right, a lot of it depends on the author's goal. Some authors, like Emily, both Emily and Kathy, money isn't really, they're hoping to at least get their money back, but they're not looking, they don't really need an income from it or anything.
Right,
So a lot of it depends on the author's goals. If they feel like, oh, I've absolutely got to get my money back in, make a profit, then they're really going to have to get out there and sell. And the other disadvantage is if you put your book with a distributor, you may very well sell more, but you're going to sell at a much lower price because the distributor's going to take more than half.
Usually
Typically, a distributor wants 55% discount,
55
so
to
then they can
70.
sell
Yeah.
at 40% discount to the stores.
The one North Country Books is 55. Most of them are 60% or more.
Right, so you're losing a lot there.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of weigh out how many do I think I can sell on my own, in which case I'd make all the profit, minus what you pay per copy, of course.
Right.
Or do I go ahead and give it to a distributor? I won't make as much money per copy, but I'll sell a lot more books. Or some of them they're just lazy and they just don't want to be involved.
Not anybody dealing with it. You guys
No.
are lazy.
I don't
No.
mean lazy. I don't mean lazy. They're just, money isn't really a big deal, and they just
Lazy
they
is
don't
not
want
the word.
they just don't want
like I would
the
go.
hassle and all that
Right.
of
Yeah.
going out and trying to do talks and go to
Laid
book
back.
fairs.
Well,
and
I've
all
said
those
on this
things,
show
so
before that
they just put the book with North Country Books or something like that, and let them do the hard work for them.
I treat it often as if I can't eat tomorrow unless I sell books. So you have to have incentive to get out and do it. If you're financially set, well, then it's a hobby and you can pursue it if you want.
Well, he also
We
thinks
have
he'll get the boot if he doesn't earn his keep.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah.
I like boots. We had one client who's I didn't realize at the time was very wealthy. So when it came time to do all that, he didn't really care much to do it, and eventually just decided to give all the books away. It's children's books, so donate them to schools and outfits like that. We've had others that are that have done the same. But Emily will probably do that as well, because money was not an issue. She wanted the story out, and she wanted to help other people going through what she went through with her husband. And she did tell me she expects to be giving them away at any opportunity to help someone.
And
Well-
she does want to, in Emily's case, I believe she does want to do the work of giving talks.
Oh, yeah, she does
and
give talks.
discussions and things, because again, that's how you can better help people.
She hadn't
Just to
really,
talk about your experience.
yeah, out west, she hadn't really laid down roots, and she was already doing talks out there. So,
Well, she gave one. Who's that? McFetridge.
oh yeah, Janet McFetridge in Champlain.
She converted that
yeah.
old building into
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
like a meeting
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
And she was doing some sort of program last summer. I think she's doing it again this year, where authors come in, say a different author every week or something like that. And Emily was going to be here. She comes once a year to visit. So Emily, I think that was Emily's first event.
Yep.
Up in Champlain.
Okay, so there's money involved when people, they've got to be able to afford to get the book printed, because
Right.
you're not going to say, oh, this is a great manuscript, I want to buy it from you. And
No,
lo
we
and
don't.
behold, this is
We did a little bit of that back when we were both working. But once, he left his job and then I lost when Pfizer shut down chemical development, it just, we just really can't afford to be putting our own personal money into people's lives. And it wasn't just that. We had a couple of partnerships that just really didn't work out very well for us at all.
Yeah.
The author really didn't hold up their end of the bargain.
The problem is you're trusting them to go out and aggressively push it, pursue sales.
And it was understood in the beginning that, okay, you're only going to pay us a smaller amount up front than you normally would, and then you're going to make up for that by selling a lot of books. And then they didn't sell a lot of books. And didn't really make an effort at selling a lot of books.
So that business plan was abandoned.
Yeah, well, I'm sure.
Well, I'm not going to be taken. We said, one thing we said was if we ever did do it again, you will be required to sell a minimum number of books, or you will hand us the cash equivalent of that at certain milestones.
Yeah, you got to.
And we figured that would probably turn most people off, so we just said, just do it the old-fashioned way. You pay us to produce your book, and then
because you want it to be a partnership and not be
right.
But I'm sure people going into this may have thought, this is my book. Everybody's going to love it. So when they found out that selling it was work, it may have. Well,
that's why on our website I actually explain a lot of that, and I actually say something like, one of the things that kind of upsets us about some of these companies, like Lulu, for instance, that they all kind of push that same agenda that, your book will be available all over the world, and okay, yeah, you're going to put it in the registry of printed books. Is anyone actually going to find it? Probably not. So yes, technically your book will be available all over the world. But do you think you're going to be selling books all over the world while you just sit home in your easy chair and eat chips? No, that's not going to happen.
And count your checks when they come in.
So rather than,
so we try to be a little more honest with people and
a lot more.
Give them a better picture of what's really going to happen, and that you're going to have to work for this. You're not just going to sit home while the money pours in.
Right, and I do tell them that you're going to need to sell. There's general numbers I can use. Say books like this, you're probably going to be investing $6,000 to $8,000 for 1,000 copies. So then you have to look at that. That's how much you spent. How much will you make for a copy sold through a store? Because they're going to buy it from you for 40% off. And so they're going to usually make about $8 on your $20 book. You might make $3. The stores make a lot more normally. So they have to look at all those numbers and decide financially, can I afford to do this? I said, do it like you do, people would say buying stocks. Make sure it's money you can afford to lose, because you might lose it. But, there are ways to sell. You do have to get out there. It's just that North Creek was a good example. We went to an event several years running. They had a train running up from Saratoga, and people would come up to run a race that day, so a lot of foot traffic in town. And so many authors are there with us, and then they'd say, oh my God, I've been here for 4 hours and I sold one book. And that's the reality of it. I do tend to write about popular subjects. I make sure that if I wrote about how wonderful my kids were, nobody's going to buy that except their grandmother or something,
Everybody thinks their kids are wonderful.
When you're writing about history or you're writing true murder, really very, very popular. So I like doing those too. So you have to write about things that other people are going to be interested in. And then you've still got to get out there, and a lot of it amounts to, when you give a presentation, do they relate to you? Do they like what you've been talking about? Because when we go out, I charge, we had to because it was costing us so much to travel and to spend, I might spend 40 hours total preparing to give a 90-minute presentation. Yeah. Got to rememorize the whole Robert Garrow story because I do it off the top of my head following my images. But, we also, when somebody asks us, say, well, the requirements are PowerPoint presentation, you need to have the projector and everything. We need a couple of tables to set up on before and for afterwards so we can sell before and after the presentation. And so besides the sales and that combined with what they pay us makes up for what I'm losing by not being home writing a book that I know is going to sell pretty well. So that's what we had to do. I didn't want to do it, but we eventually had to. And still, I think I did tell you on air before that we did it at first just so people would stop asking, because
and they kept asking
because I'm so busy. But it is part of the business, and it really is fun to meet a lot of people and hear their stories. So I do like that part of it.
Well, once in a while you must get an idea or something from these trips where people say something and you put that in the back of your head
and you pick up business as well. Yeah. People see us there and they say, well, you've produced all these books, and first of all, they're shocked. Like at Glens Falls, we have about 40 of our titles laid out, and I said, well, Jill actually physically made a lot of these, and that surprises them that you could actually do this. So, you know, and we're always down there. We get a lot of questions about the business and about potential publishing.
Now, is it, you know, bookstores are getting to be a rarity.
Yes, they are.
Is it getting harder and harder to find outlets for books?
Well, not for Bloated Toe, because we generally don't sell. I had offers before, requests from Barnes and Noble and others, but we don't sell through Amazon.
You never had any in Borders in Plattsburgh? Or?
We did just
We
in
had
the local
offers for
Borders.
it.
Yes,
Right.
they asked to
Because the
carry
local
them.
Borders, they would buy books directly from local authors.
Right.
But if you wanted to get your books, say the Borders in Saratoga or something like that, then you had to go through North Country Books, and we didn't do
But
that.
we do, you know, the new bookstore in Plattsburgh at the mall, Bookburg. Charles Lascalzo runs that, and we had an arrangement with him at first, and then we've been using a book spinner rack. We bought a bunch of these, and we are in many of the Kinney stores, and we put one in his store. You'll see it if you go there at all. You'll see it right up near the front, and we've sold very well there. A lot of action. You know, you get a lot of foot traffic. So we like to support the local bookstores as well. You know, we've been in Cornerstone downtown for a long time.
Since the beginning, I think. They had the first Lion Mountain book, definitely. Yeah. Not long after we published it, I believe.
Yeah, well, Dan's definitely, you know. Oh, Cornerstone. I was thinking of Cornerstone.
Oh,
we have books in there.
We're down there
There's
too.
two Cornerstones.
That's right.
One's a bookstore.
One's a drugstore.
One's a drugstore.
We have books at the other corner.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah. And I'm sure in a place like that Plattsburgh bookstore, a lot of the people buying it with a local name on it might be tourists. They say, yeah, we're up here and we see a book, Escape from Dannemora, or we see the Adirondack, whatever that Bob Garrel killer was there. You know, here's some local flavor. We'll pick it up as a souvenir of our visit to this area, and so I'm sure a store like that will sell a lot to out of town folks, and not just to local people who are looking for local history.
Yes, for a long time, we have our books up in Dick's Country Store in Churubusco, and he had done that Plattsburgh question and answer book several years ago. And it's funny, it didn't actually sell that well here in Plattsburgh, and yet up at Dick's, it was selling like crazy. And so Larry asked him one day, the Canadians love it. The Canadians would. So I don't know why that particular book just appealed to them so much, but it did. It was kind of funny that.
I get that a lot from her. I don't know why they're buying these.
I don't know why they like it.
I don't know why you're buying his books, but
yeah.
Keep doing it though.
Yeah.
All right, so Jill and I interrupted your train here, so
well,
get back on track, engineer.
you can go back to Jill. Here's another project that we did.
Well, you already not devote too much time to this,
have
'cause
covered
you already
it,
did a whole show on this.
And what's the
The
title?
history of the Plattsburgh Military Reservation of Pictorial History.
Your neighbor. Now, what are the odds that a guy who lives across the road from you would be a major author? I mean, this is like Greenwich Village here.
Yeah.
Third one, right?
Yeah.
That was the third book we did.
Third book we did.
With Richard Frost?
We did one with him personally, and then we did one for him for the hospital, and then this one for the museum.
Okay, Richard Frost. And we got to mention Melissa, too, Melissa Peck.
Yep, Melissa Peck was the co-author. So anyway, this has been almost a year now since this came out.
Oh, yeah.
So like I said, I know you've already done a show on it, but yeah, we did do this.
That's a Bloated Toe publication.
So we had to work closely with both Rich and Melissa as well as Clinton County Historical Association, since this was their project.
So
they were the ones who secured the funding for the project through the Lake Champlain Basin program.
This was largely done by Jill. I did some editing. There were, certain things that I changed or fixed, but otherwise.
Well, there's a lot of info in here, and
responsible.
especially, obviously, it's called the Pictorial History, so obviously there's a lot of pictures.
Better be.
So,
those are my favorite type of books.
Great. Your nuns would be so proud.
I got a lot of pictures in my books. So yeah, so it's
anyway, so that was another one of the projects that we've done since we last met with you.
okay. And we should point out that people who don't have a storefront, this here, just like your books, are available around the world. So this video is going to be available around the world.
Around the world.
So people who would be interested in seeing what you have available, I want to make sure to mention this a couple times on this program today. You've got a website.
Mm-hmm. BloatedToe.com.
Who keeps up the website? Is it you, Larry?
Well,
No.
I get credit for it a lot, but
Yeah, I know. People are always going, "Oh, that's a great website, Larry." I'm like, really?
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, and he just says thanks.
I appreciate it.
So did you say, well, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
that's a good line. To
I
use.
have an assistant, yeah.
Yeah, an assistant.
She looks in on it once in a while. All right, so you know she created the entire thing, and it's a commerce site, so it's very difficult.
Right. Most of our publications are available for purchase online. This particular one is not. This is, I think, exclusively available at the Clinton County Historical Museum. They may have wholesaled it to some local stores. I'm not sure about that. You'd have to contact them and find out. They're ClintonCountyHistorical.com.
Okay.
As everyone
they
just, yeah, it's expensive.
Eventually,
though.
we're working on a website for them right now, and their old site was done through Wix, and it's a massive site. There's a lot of content, and Wix doesn't make it easy. In fact, they purposely make it difficult for you to transfer your site elsewhere. You have to physically go and get every image, download it, re-upload it. So eventually, both ClintonCountyHistorical.org and ClintonCountyHistorical.com will point to the same site. Right now, .org is under construction, making it a new site. So we purchased the domain .com for them to use for their old site. That's
But you know, she writes code, so she controls everything. So anytime there's a glitch on our site, which there never is, right?
But as far as contacting them at this point, you know, ClintonCountyHistorical.com has a contact form and their phone number and all that if you wanted to contact them.
Okay, but people can find, outside of that one,
Just
your
about-
books
Yeah.
on,
Just about
on that
everything
website.
is
All the
available
books,
for online purchase.
the
on
ones
the
we've done for
website.
other authors, the ones that I've written, and all the reprints.
And you have a
historical
Facebook page too?
Yeah, we have. Let's see, we have a Facebook page for Bloated Toe Publishing. We have a Facebook page for Lawrence P. Gooley, which he pretty much has nothing to do with. That's all me as
which
well.
he didn't ask for. So, yeah.
And then we have a site that we run called North Country Authors that showcases a couple dozen or so authors from around the North Country and Adirondacks. NorthCountryAuthors.org, and it also has a Facebook page called North Country Authors. And we have a Facebook page dedicated to the Escape from Dannemora book, and we have a Facebook page dedicated to the Terror in the Adirondacks book. And probably more to come, but that's what we have for now.
And you've got other sites, like you've got a LawrenceGooley.com, separate from.
Yes, he has his own website, LawrenceGooley.com.
Well, I would expect,
which again,
I'd expect nothing less.
It's a lot. It's a lot of work for me to take care of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But one of the keys to success is to learn how to delegate.
Yes.
And you must be a very good delegator.
Yeah.
No, the entire thing was my idea. I said, you should have a website.
Well,
So I made him a website.
Yeah, so he delegated that thought.
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
whole
right?
process.
Yeah, I'm psychic, Calvin. In addition to my other skills, I'm psychic.
Sometimes
I
you
can
lay
read
out lay out
minds.
hints there, and the other person.
There was no, he had, okay, I'm serious. The thought had not even crossed his mind that he should have his own website. It's completely me. So stop trying to give him credit where it's not due.
When I need to know where I'm appearing, I have to go look at
Yeah.
my website because she puts it on there. I was just checking it to see
It's like,
because
what events
I've
do I
got
have?
some coming up in
And
July.
I have not. Yeah, that one coming up in July, I have not added that yet.
Yeah.
Been kind of busy.
So I don't know
So-
where I'm going to be.
Yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing.
He's the only follower of this website.
Pretty much, yeah.
But
Yeah, all traffic is for and from Lawrence P. Gooley. And then we do, actually, I made a website, Escape from Dannemora Prison. I think it's escapefromdannemoraprison.com for that book, and a terrorintheadirondacks.com for the terror book.
I should show them this.
well,
This
And, oh, we also have a website, adirondackmurders.com.
this one here.
there we go.
We have a web. Is that good? We have a website for that one, and that was our fastest seller. It's just you know, like you said, 1,000 is a lot of copies.
It's not our best seller yet, but it
overall,
fastest as far as.
Terror in the Adirondacks is our overall bestseller, but the fastest. I would look at selling 1,000 copies maybe within 1 to 2 years. If authors do that up here, they're really happy with it. If you can imagine, in a month we moved 1,500, so it was a lot of shipping going on, and we weren't complaining. Just ordering shippers and packing them as fast as I could.
Well, I imagine once that movie that was shot recently, was it Showtime that's going to be on?
Yeah.
Once that gets out there, this will.
Yeah, it might pick up again.
It might.
And they actually, Ben Stiller's company did actually order 2 or 3 copies, I think.
Yeah.
Wow. I hope it didn't break their bank.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And well, they shelled out $40 some odd to have it shipped overnight.
Oh.
To
Apparently
California.
They were,
He was just here a couple days before, and then when they got to
Right, I'm
California, they
thinking,
ordered the books.
you know,
Well,
you were
what's-
right near Maggie Pharmacy. They've got them right there.
What's $40?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, anyway, this, you know, the cover sells a lot of books, but this is really basically the history of the prison. And so their story is very important to the history of it, but I have the history of all the escapes and the tortures, and it makes for a really good presentation.
Yeah, it's not just about Matt and
Oh
Sweat.
yeah, they're,
Right.
like I said, they're about, I don't know, 6% of the book, maybe. It's a small percentage. I have a lot of images to go with it, showing some of the old tortures and the infamous inmates that were held there, all kinds of things, and it makes a nice 90-minute presentation. We've been asked already to do a couple of them this summer in Wells and Speculator. One's finalized, one isn't. But you know, and like I said, I do have to ask for pay to do it.
Oh,
But
sure.
I should have raised the price, because as soon as I told her the price, oh, that's no problem. So you know, that's when you always regret. Boy, I should have said higher. But you know, we went there and they were very pleased with what we did last year. We had a packed house. You know, people turned away.
Yeah,
So.
the Lake Pleasant Public Library. I think it's July 13th. I know it's a Thursday. And it's in mid-July somewhere.
Okay, so we'll be following along. We'll be part of your posse, and we'll follow along. You know, right now these guys are so busy. You're going to miss the big event this coming weekend as we're recording this.
Oh boy,
You know, aren't you? You're not going to the wedding, are you?
no, we're gonna miss it.
You're going to miss it, you know, and that's how busy these folks are.
I could not possibly care less.
You know,
about the royal wedding.
there are so many things happening in the world, and I turn on that morning news, and they spend half an hour talking about the royal wedding, and I say, stop it. You know, there are real things happening out here,
Yes, real news.
like people escaping from Dannemora.
Yes.
You know, so all
Well, they
right.
were just in lockdown again this past weekend, weren't they?
Yeah.
And it seemed like the whole prison system had some issues. There
Yeah.
were cases of violence at Dannemora,
Yeah, just
down at
happened
Great
at-
Meadow.
Yeah, and Malone.
The
they
one
just
in
said-
Malone,
Well, yeah, but if you read their monthly reports, which I did put in the book, this is very common. You know, a guy just decides he's going to throw his elbow into somebody's face. You know, they'll hit a guard like that, and you know the guards pay the price. So it's a
Yeah.
violent, dangerous place to work.
Yeah. So as we're recording this, they started last Friday lockdown, and I don't know if it's all over this week or if it's over yet. Here today is a Wednesday, so there is a lockdown there at Dannemora, Clinton Correctional. So yeah, as you say, it's a dangerous place, and the people who are in there aren't there because they were jaywalking.
They stole a candy bar or something.
Yeah, these are in many cases very dangerous criminals.
Right. For most of the life of Dannemora, I have it in this book that it was designated by the state as the place for the worst of the worst. They had like one felony, you might go to Auburn. Two, you went to
What was it, incorrigibles they called them?
yeah. Anyway, but 3 felonies or incorrigibles, they went to Dannemora, and I think it's like around 90% violent felons are there. So yeah, it used to be a bit different because when they first built the prison, there were only 2. There was Sing Sing and Auburn. So when they built Dannemora, or Clinton Prison, but we've always called it Dannemora, they designated certain areas. This would be the Adirondack region and generally down the Hudson River and maybe a little bit south and west of Albany. Anybody that had to be sent to prison coming from those counties would go to Clinton Prison. But eventually they found that the minor criminals were learning a lot of terrible things from the major criminals, and they wanted to separate them. So this became the place for the 3 felonies, or anything like that. They were going up north. So it's always been considered the worst place to be, even though we hear so much about Attica and other places.
Siberia.
Yeah, I do mention the whole little Siberia thing has been distorted. A lot of people, you know, we were raised knowing that Siberia was not just one of the coldest places on earth. It was where you were exiled and you were put in labor camps, prisons, and that's
Right.
where you died. And then they just brought in more. People would think, you know, they start to say little Siberia up north because it's so cold. No, there's a lot more to the story of Siberia than cold. So I thought that was important. Now, as a follow-up to that book, I really couldn't fit it in there anyway. Our other project last year was based on Clinton Prison. I was trying to get the bootlegging book done, and there's just too much information. I didn't have time. So I switched to this other project, and this is like a hefty book. This will hold the door open
Yeah.
for you. Okay.
I think that's an example of something would have been too thick for us to do here.
Yes. So I was curious about, at one time, they executed people at Clinton Prison. And curiosity about who was executed and what were the reasons. And it just grew into something I had tentatively planned on doing. And then I said, well, it's like a true murder book, really, because I need to take whichever person was executed, I want to know their entire story. So I have to research their life story and their criminal history. And I had mentioned here on one of your shows that they used to send reporters and they would record virtually every word spoken in court back in the 1800s. But they also, a lot of this was in print. And what's happened in modern times now, through Google and other services, they've been scanning stuff that you would think would be useless to most people, which it is. But the fact is, when you're a lawyer and you're citing any appeals, you need to look at all the records going way, way back, and that's what they have on record now. So you can find, if you search the right places or the right terms online, you'll find that a lot of the murder trials, where a man was convicted, that means you're sentenced to death. Almost automatically, there's going to be an appeal, and they have all the appeals records in there, so you can actually see how they replay the testimony, and you can hear or read what every witness had to say. Some of these are like 2,000 or 3,000 pages long, so I've read thousands of pages of testimony to produce this book. So I didn't know at the start that I really should make sure I've got the testimony from every person's trial, but eventually I found 41 that had been sentenced to death. 26 were actually executed. And I won't say which one, so as you read the book you find out that last second reprieve happened 3 or 4 times, and then maybe they were executed, maybe they weren't, but I've got it all in there.
So you've got, what, 41
stories? Actually, one of my most popular books, 25 Diabolical Adirondack Murders, right? It's hard to remember those titles. True murder stories. Yeah, 25 true murder stories. All the details of everything. Well, I really should have advertised this book that way, because this is 41 of those stories. And some of the people are from up here, but like I said, back then, they drew from Columbia County, down along the Hudson River and Albany area. And of course, there's more people in the Albany area, so there's many murders from there. Some are from, Clinton, Essex, Franklin counties, and I have all their stories beginning to end. It's just really fascinating stuff. If you like true murder stories like they have on different television shows.
Who doesn't like murders? Yeah.
They're fun.
Yeah. So this is published this past year?
Yes. We came out
last
fall.
Last fall. 448 pages.
It's a lot of pages.
And that's not a lot of pictures.
Well, there's quite a few images, but first of all, they didn't take a lot of pictures back in those days.
Well,
So
I hope not.
But I do like to
But you
feature.
have,
I like to feature headlines to guide the story, so people will see what was appearing in newspapers. You can't trust what's in newspapers, but a lot of it is accurate. And then
views expressed are those of Lawrence P. Gooley.
Well, in defense of newspaper writers and reporters, though, when they first do a story, they have a deadline, and it's usually tomorrow. Something happened today, I need a story tomorrow. So you do find that as you look at, say, a murder that happened 50 years ago, the first day's story is pretty spectacular, but then as time goes on, they interview more people and they correct a lot of the details. So a week or two into it, you're finding things that have changed. So you make sure to read all those, but the key really is a testimony. If you can get that, you have what people swore to in court. Whether or not they were lying, that is the official record. So, and judges and lawyers are pretty good at picking through that as well and finding the truth.
That's a lot of research on your part.
Oh, incredible. I really didn't think I was going to finish it in time. It was one of those things that I vowed not to do again. No more day and night, 14 hours a day. It's just, you end up exhausted.
And he whined about it incessantly. So.
I've never whined in my life.
So he's there on the computer and playing games, and you come in. Oh,
Hurry up and switch. Yeah, I'm exhausted.
Oh my gosh, I'm so.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
In the preface, let me see, details what's in. From January 1890 to April 1914, they had a death house at Clinton Prison. But I wrote that it's roughly 20 years. That's 24 years. But they didn't execute people at first because there were, certain factors that delayed it until 1892. So we're a couple of years into it. I mentioned that from the first electrocution there in 1892 to the last one in 1913, 26 murderers left this earthly world in the death house at New York State's infamous prison known as Little Siberia. During that same time, many other convicted killers who were sentenced to die in Danamore's chair found themselves locked in seclusion on death row, waiting nervously for their day of reckoning. But through the intervention of fate, mercy, or legal maneuvers, they escaped execution. So I profile those 41 stories in here. And I mentioned that I do have the trial records, appeals court transcripts, prison records, genealogy archives, census records, and newspaper articles as a general guide. You can tell, comparing the two, how much, how accurate they are. We have certain newspapers up here from long ago that you can look through, but you have to know which ones tend to sensationalize and outright fabricate. Makes a lot better story if we throw this in.
Hey, it's in print.
Not true.
Must be true.
Yep. And not true at all. And I'm going through that right now with bootlegging, because you'll read, maybe what they used to do after they seized things was they'd sell them through the government. They'd have all these auctions. So they'll detail, we arrested so-and-so, we seized this, and, or they won't name the person, but we seized this many cases of gin, and the owner wants to come in and claim it, they have the right to, and within 24 days it becomes our property, and we'll sell it. They give it to hospitals or sell it. And they had, hay wagons and cars, and a lot of cars and trucks.
Well, you see the postcards of the lined up on Lake Street and Rouse's Point there with having a big auction with all the bootleg cars.
Yeah.
Now, all the people that were executed, they were all murderers?
Yes, that's the one key to getting on death row, is you have to be a convicted murderer. There was no execution for any, well, there used to be execution for other crimes.
Well, I remember as a kid growing up, this was, I think the Lindbergh kidnapping was in '39, I believe. I don't know that for certain. But anyway, as a kid growing up, I remember people were very concerned about kidnappings, which, is still a problem. But back then, kidnapping was a death penalty.
Yeah, they changed it to a federal crime.
Said, as a kid, I said, that's terrible. If he kills me, or if he doesn't kill me, you're going to get the death penalty, so you might as well kill me.
Right. So
you might as well get his money worth.
Well, no witness that way if he kills me, but if I'm...
Right.
So
in this
Plus,
book...
he's going to get the death penalty anyway.
That's what I'm saying. So why not kill me if he's already got the death penalty for kidnapping me? There's no incentive for him not to kidnap me.
Paranoid child, apparently.
Yeah, just occupied my mind every night.
Well, opening the book, I addressed the electric chair. Now, they used to execute people by hanging, and they finally said, after decades and decades, that, this is inhumane. We can use electricity to kill them, But one thing that we often don't think about is Auburn and Sing Sing are our first prisons. So what did we do before that with all these people who were killing, who were raping, who were stealing? A whole bunch of those crimes had a sentence of execution because you had no place to put the people. We didn't, you would hold them in jail for a few days, but then you have to execute them. You don't have a prison.
Wow.
So,
you didn't have any of this, like 20 years on death row with multiple appeals.
Right. So when they built Clinton Prison, you had another place to put people when they weren't going to be executed. They weren't executed there at first, but then, as I said, they started in the 1890s. When they used electricity, it's really, this was fascinating to study because you said not many pictures. Here's some pictures you might, when we're discussing executions. Well, there are pictures of how they used to do it. Some of these are...
not photos, but drawings.
Right, sketches.
Yeah.
Overseas, one way of executing murders
was elephants stepping on your head.
Stake them on the ground and have elephants walk on them or step on their heads. Yeah. Exactly. There's all. So they had official methods of executing people, and what they did was they assigned a committee to look into these, and they looked into everything you could imagine, like blowing as a projectile from a cannon. That is one method of execution used in one of the countries in the world, and it's pretty effective.
Makes for a good circus too.
Yeah, if it failed, did you?
It never failed.
It never failed.
No.
It always.
And then the one that they chose as the most humane, or second to most humane, was the guillotine. We think that's terrible, but they say no. It's actually the quickest.
Quick, yeah.
We assume so.
Burying people alive.
You've never talked to anyone who's been beheaded, though.
Yeah.
You never know. Maybe you stay alive with your head cut off for an hour.
But when you read some of these, it's shocking. Flaying. They actually skinned people. Some countries did that. Poisoning.
So moving right along.
Mortar and pestle.
Moving right along here.
Well,
all you people who haven't turned the channel yet.
Well,
listening to
it is a dark subject, though. what they used electricity for then, they were just really learning about this at the time, was they thought, you know, with all the things that we've done, they had things they called the electric chair back in the mid-1800s, but these were health treatments. These weren't to kill people. I have advertisements that show them. So they were doing experiments with electricity, and interestingly, it wasn't just for killing, it was for bringing life. And I know a subject, a famous book probably comes to mind, or a famous story, but this one of the men was Giovanni Aldini, who was doing research with electricity. They could take things like a bull's head had been severed, and they'd hook up electrodes, and he could make the eyes and the ears and parts move.
But why?
Why
Because
not?
they thought, they didn't understand electricity, and they thought it had something to do with restoring or bringing life.
Bringing life back
Right.
to the...
So they tried this with some executed prisoners as well. They could make body parts move. They had observers, doctors come in, and they did all these. I wrote about this in the book, discussing it all. And then finally,
You don't want to
they
give too
realized-
much away here, Larry.
no, but finally they realized
Are
that
you
this,
squeamish, Calvin?
Huh? Well, I'm
that because
concerned about the people.
they had killed bulls,
Okay,
different
this
animals
is a
like that,
PG-13 rated show now.
they realized that because it had the power to kill a horse or a bull, that this might be a good way to kill humans that we
Oh,
need
yeah.
to execute, and that's why they made the change. Then you'll notice the same change happened when they went to injection. We said, oh no, electric chair's inhumane, now we can inject people. So the same story of hanging being replaced,
Uh-huh.
same thing happened with the electric chair. So that is
Well, they
the
found out,
chairs on the
like,
cover.
these injections, that half the time the drugs aren't doing what they're supposed to do when the people are
Well,
end up suffering.
the guy I mentioned, Aldini, some of the work he was doing, if you recall the story of Frankenstein, that's where it comes from. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's book Frankenstein, bringing someone to life through electricity. So they tried this, but they could never prove it was possible. So
Okay, so there you go. Do not try to resuscitate your dead animals by
no, probably not.
electricity. Okay.
Just clone them.
You heard it right here.
What they used to do, the man who
See,
handled
you
the
always learn something from Bloated Toe.
Yeah.
they had a state guy. They actually gave him the title like state electrician because they didn't want him to be called, you know, the executioner. But he went from prison to prison
I
to
know,
handle.
electrician makes it sound like he was just there.
Yeah.
Well, he's the
Fixing-
guy you wanted
fixing the
because
light
he'd get it
switches
done
when they
right.
didn't work.
He'd go, like if there were executions at Clinton, he would come up here and set everything up, and then he would handle it. And one of the tests they might do early on was, you know, killing a bull or some other animal. But one that he was famous for was meat. They would stick the electrodes in there and actually cook meat really quickly. Yeah. And yeah, when they did the final execution, the observers are in there and they'd light up a
They'd have
row of
barbecue
lights.
with the...
Yeah. Well, inmates actually complained that they were throwing this meat away, and it was
Well, sure.
perfectly good cooked beef that they wanted.
Yeah. I can
True
understand.
story.
Well done.
So you shouldn't be laughing. This is a book about murder. But anyway, I was really
Oh, it's
curious.
about giving murderers the death penalty, and I don't really have
I
a
was
big
curious
problem
about the
with
backstory of all these people and how they got there. So, and the stories really, there are so many really fascinating ones. I had,
How about
well,
horse
actually,
thieves?
the first man.
I said, how about horse thieves? They hung them too, you
Yep,
know.
they used to.
that. Well,
I
You
gave
got a
them-
problem with that?
stealing a horse was like stealing a car.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I'm not totally
We're
for
not-
the death penalty, but I'm not that. I'm
All
not
right.
as disturbed by it as some people
No,
are.
but people who look
Moving
at
right along.
people who look at the history of it know that a man in Plattsburgh was supposed to be the first one in the United States to be executed in the electric chair. He committed a murder here in Plattsburgh on Tom Miller Road. So he's sentenced to death. They're going to
Is he in the book?
put him in the. Yes, he is.
All right.
Positively, he's one of the 41.
Don't tell us.
Okay.
Don't tell us the ending.
Well, I can tell you. I have to tell you at least that he wasn't the first because there are other stories that come into play.
Okay.
So he was
He might have had a stay of execution.
right.
You're not going to tell us yet.
His ending is in there.
Buy the book.
And then there was a second man who was supposed to be. Now it looks like he's going to be the first one at Clinton Prison, and he didn't last long enough to go to the chair. And like, we'll have to read the book to find out what happened to him. So But
So you got 41 stories in there now.
yes,
Judy and I right now are watching on Netflix Father Brown Mysteries or whatever it's called. So you could almost have a TV series here about each one of these.
I'm sure Netflix will be calling any day.
Yeah.
well, actually there was some talk about it produced locally, but one of the issues I'm told, and I didn't know at first, they were discussing my Terror in the Adirondacks. Very, you know, that's been out since '08. Still,
It's the Robert Garrow story.
yeah, still
Not the
very,
baseball Robert Garrow. but
right.
the-
Still a very popular story. The problem is that advertisers would fund it, and you really want your name associated with terror in the Adirondacks or
Right.
murder and everything. I don't. It is a really popular subject.
Well, I don't know.
You know,
I mean,
a lot of stuff.
diagnosis murder, a lot of shows.
Well, the ones Jill likes to watch, the true ones on Discovery ID. There's several channels. That's all they carry, and we watch a lot of them ourselves.
We since
I've
found
been
out
on it a couple of
some
times.
of them.
So.
I mean, they're most likely embellishing and whatnot.
Oh, of course.
That's pretty much a given. But one of them we found really does venture quite far from the the true story, and that was kind of disappointing.
Right, but I've been on a couple of times.
It was a show I really enjoyed watching too, and
now you're wondering
to find out just how far.
many others.
They ended up doing one of his stories, and we were just.
They came here and sitting right here in this room. This is where they
Yeah.
filmed, and they kept wanting me to tell the story the way they were telling it. And I finally just refused.
Well,
to
he
do
ended
it.
up. Well, the producer on it. I don't know who was doing the research. They sent because they actually had a script, and they sent the script, and he's looking at it. He said, "This isn't anything. This didn't happen. That didn't happen. This didn't happen that way." And we thought, well, who's doing the research for these stories? So we ended up actually contacting the producer, and the producer was kind of upset. And he said, "Well, no, we want to tell the real story." So he ended up pretty much going off script. But the other problem was when they actually did the show. Like for instance, the story took place around like 1900, something like that, and they set it to modern day. What's the big? Why not just show it when it happened?
Yeah.
And they totally changed the husband. They totally changed his job. I think they made him like a farmer when he had actually been like some kind of boiler operator or something. Like, I don't understand, why did you change these basic facts of the story?
Actually, the one that I went on before that, it was a special called Bloody Marys. They stayed true to the story. They did a good job. That was done by NBC Peacock Productions for Discovery ID. And they flew us to New York City and did the interviews there, and yeah, they really stuck to the story, and she was very good at asking me questions.
Right, instead of having a set script, she had a set of questions to ask him, but then he was able to answer them in his own words without them trying to, push him one way or the other.
So you might look at yourself on TV and say,
stay.
I hate this. Well, that actually came out very well.
And they did portray that story pretty close to the way he'd written it, so that was much more entertaining, much more satisfying to see them do the story properly.
Yeah, it wasn't. It's kind of I put it kind of like the old algebra books. You look in the back of the algebra book and it always had the answer.
Oh, yeah.
But you had to show how you got that answer. They didn't mind showing you the answer.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing here. These people have, here's the answer. The guy's dead. So they just changed the part in the middle about how it happened.
Yeah.
And what's odd, though, when you do stories, I've done so many, the truth is more spectacular. It's way better than the stuff they were trying to tell.
The whole story was so bizarre and twisted and convoluted and evil on its own. Like, there was absolutely no reason to change anything, embellish anything, nothing. There was just no reason to. The story was perfectly entertaining on its own.
Oh yeah, it's just.
It was probably worse than what you'd see in a complete work of fiction.
Okay, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Yeah, we do have. There's others. There's like I don't want to give too many spoilers out. There's one man who was convicted of murder, sentenced to Clinton, and he was given a reprieve. And he's one of the very unusual stories that eventually he learned to read and write while he was in prison. He became very well educated and was finally released. So not everyone stayed there until death. Some did, but he's one of the unusual stories. There was one really I found fascinating to work on, a guy named Bartholomew Shea. He's known as Bat Shea, and there was a bar until recently named Bat Shea's or something like that down in Saratoga area, Saratoga, Troy. He was involved in voter fraud, which, this big topic today, which really almost never happens, but back then, and I'm sure you remember from your youth, I know a couple of villages where the guy, he just stand by the door, $5, $5.
We won't mention any names.
It's all well documented in newspaper stories as well. There were arrests, and anyway, he was involved in that down there. And there were two factions going back and forth, and there was a riot took place, and he was involved in the murder, and he was sentenced to Clinton prison. So I have his entire story, but you wouldn't expect to have one connected to something like that. But they hired people back then, and he was one of them that controlled a group of men, his henchmen, and they'd say, well, we need a lot of votes in this district over in Troy or something. Or maybe in New Hampshire they went to different places, and that's what they would do. They'd go in and vote, and then they'd go back outside, and they'd come back in and vote again. And they could...
As somebody else.
Yeah. And that's all you had to do, is just keep voting. He got paid for doing it.
A lot of dead people voted.
Yep. One of the famous ones, a guy named Frank Conroy, is really, was actually known as Charlie, but he's a famous story in Ogdensburg, but I'd never seen the full story of what happened, and I have that whole thing. It's really remarkable, just extremely violent. The biggest one, the most unusual, would be the Van Wormer brothers. There were 3 brothers who were sentenced to die at Clinton Prison, and people usually ask me, boy, that's got to be the most unusual thing ever, and I'm forced to say, well, it's the second time 3 brothers were sentenced in New York State. So, that was really a long, dragged-out case. They went into this, they murdered someone, but there was a 4th person involved, their second cousin. And his mom wasn't too happy with the thought of her son being executed, so he turned state's evidence. And so I have all the transcripts of everything that each of the brothers eventually told on the witness stand and what he told as well. And their story from beginning to end really is a remarkable story.
All right. Any of these, some of them obviously must be included a little bit in different wording, different story, but these people must be included in that other book?
Yeah, some of them...
Escape from Dannemora book?
Which one is this? That's this one here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, out of necessity, there were a few... their stories were not told in there. They may have been referenced,
right,
but not told.
But this is the details.
Yes, but in 25 Diabolical Adirondack Murders, I had done that several years ago, and there were a few who were executed at Clinton Prison. So when I did this book, I said, well, now I have this thing that I hate doing, but they have to be included here. I might have had additional information, though, from the transcripts or something, and I did have a few additional images. So, I've been a buyer and reader of books all my life, and I understand sometimes what an author has to do, like, oh, this is repeat, I've read this before, but there's some of it, but this, like I said, when we publish, we know the content, I know word count. This is more than 2 of the average book that you'll buy anyway.
Oh, that's a thick book.
Yeah. And I went with 11-point font, so it's a little bit smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was something like 125, 130,000 words, where a lot of our 224-page books, that's a number you often use, that would be about 55,000 to 65,000 maybe. So it's a lot more. It's huge content for the value. It's a value for the dollar for sure, because you figure it's like 65, 70 cents a story, something like that.
Okay, just for the folks joining us late, we're at Bloated Toe Publications in Schuyler Falls, Peru, and Plattsburgh, right?
Right.
We have the Executive Vice President, Jill Jones, here, and
Ooh.
the noted author, I know him as Larry, that's fortunate I am, but everybody else to the world, he's known as Lawrence P. Gooley. John and Tom's little brother. And
Well,
Judy says we got to take a break because we're going to replace that battery in there. So Larry's going to recharge his, and we're going to recharge that camera battery. Okay, the fresh battery is in there. We can go for another 5-6 hours. Larry, you up for it?
no problem.
Oh, yeah, sure. Let me go.
Now, if I know Larry Gooley, he's got a lot
Yeah,
more to tell
boy.
us, right?
A lot more.
A lot.
Now,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
found something on page 278.
Uh-oh,
said
another grisly murder here.
Yeah, you called a lack of
True
images.
crime, Calvin.
There you go.
There we go. Oh, pictures.
This is, let me see. This is an invitation, I believe. Yes.
Look at 2 pages
Without being long.
without I gotta hold it behind that. There we go. There we go.
That's a picture of related to the Van Wormer story. The Van Wormer brothers are there, and some of the relatives of the victim. And on this side is
On the left,
an invitation.
my left, you're right.
Yeah, an invitation to attend the executions at Dannemora.
Invitation only.
That's right.
Did you have to RSVP? I imagine, right?
Yep. They had to, and they only had so many spots they could fill, and they wanted usually town officials or city officials, doctors, and things like that. Lawmen. There were a lot of lawmen attended these
So,
to complete the
So-
job.
so this is what the town officials did. Now they go to bridge openings and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
But they used to go to, it was an exclusive ticket, difficult to come by.
I imagine that something to tell the grandchildren about. Now you've mentioned. Do you want to get to your bootlegging at all, or?
Well, there's a few things, when you're reading about these executions, some of the nightmare things that you think probably aren't really true, are true. There were some failed executions, or at least one instance at Clinton where a body was removed and put in the next room and they're going to autopsy it, and somebody went by and said, the guy's moving. again. You know, you got to hurry up and put them back in the chair and zap them again. So, yeah.
Okay.
This is part of the process, because it's, you know, it's supposed to be very neat, clean, and efficient, but
Well,
it didn't
yeah.
always happen that way. They had some guys who they said were a little more resistant than others. So you had to be an expert with electricity. You had to know what it took and where to attach electrodes and things like that to make it as painless as could be. And I always pictured it taking longer, but usually, you know, once they, you know, you've heard of scenes of where the minister might come in and spend time in the cell with them. But from the moment they enter the execution room, it was usually within 1 to 3 minutes they were gone.
Oh, wow.
It was, I thought it took much longer, but
It does on TV.
yeah,
And in
they
the
want to
movies.
drag it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But normally you're in there, you have little to say. They're going to attach things, and some of the men, and it's actually true, they've said, could you put that, needs to be a little bit tighter on my ankle or wherever you're attaching it. And then, you know, they put a hood on them and they just give the signal, and the guy behind the curtain, behind the scene, pulls the lever, and that's it.
Okay. Now, moving right along, do you want to talk about bootlegging or not?
Well, another project. This
there's more.
might be this year's one of the books we published this year.
2018.
Yes, we're not sure yet, because we had a person come to us. I have a little bit of information on him here.
Only 15 pages on this one.
He's retired from the New York State Education Department. I know he worked for DEC as well. And as a youth, he spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks as a Boy Scout, really fell in love with the place. So they moved back near the Adirondacks in retirement. She's still working, but he's retired. And he began working on a book about lean-tos. And he told me he was going to originally tell the story of Adirondack lean-tos. He thought it would be interesting. And, you know, well, it might be difficult to sell a lot of books. It all depends. But, you know, they wanted to do it. But there was a huge issue that had happened. He sent the manuscript away to be edited. And the editor did a pretty thorough job. It wasn't grammar and punctuation. It was mostly, you know, you've said this, you could say this differently. And he made hundreds and hundreds of comments on this. So somewhere they were going to have a second editor work on this. So something went wrong somewhere, because what they ended up with was a printed copy of the version of the manuscript with changes that might be made. But they lost the digital copy. So they don't have a copy on the computer now. They have an older copy of it. And when they actually came up here, they have a couple of homes, you know where, in Scroon Lake
Screw Lake and Clifton Park.
Clifton Park. So they came up here to see us, and we laid everything out, and I looked at it, and finally dawns on me. I said, what you need is this big stack of paper here, 400 pages, all loose leaf paper. It's all printed. That's considered now the master copy. So what they needed, and their editor really put the screws to them, they paid them a lot of money, the second editor. They lost a lot of money on this and have nothing to show for it. Was they wanted what's on the printed copy to be in the digital copy. And I have just an old digital copy that was a mess. So you had to sit there with your computer screen and with paper and compare page by page. And there was an additional problem, because you think we could just scan that sheet and now we've got the text, so we could do this. Well, he had done a citation method, a lot of citations, a lot of footnotes, endnotes, and he decided after all the suggestions by the first editor that I think I'm going to go to a different citation method. So instead of saying 7 at the end of this sentence, he wants to put a bit of information about where it came from, something like that. So what he did was he wrote all those in by hand all through the manuscript. So on one page, there's scribbling everywhere. There's about 8 handwritten entries, Calvin Castine, book title, page numbers and all that. And, you know, it's handwritten. There's a lot of scratching. It's very difficult to read. Some of it I couldn't read. So I gave them a price that I thought would probably be too high for them, and they hired me to do it. So I've been at that for a long time now, because I have to wait sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to hear back from them. But as soon as I have stuff, I work on it. So I'm editing this huge manuscript. And when I get it done, he is going to want to publish it, and I think they're going to do it with us, hopefully by the end of the year. I told him, if you have it out for the holiday season, it has grown into the history of lean-tos. So he's
Really
looking at,
thorough
yeah,
history.
you could be looking back at mentions of them thousands of years ago about different societies that use them, a lot of Indian, Native American material, and Indians from other countries. So it is very interesting. I haven't actually read it as you would read a book, but I've read it enough as I'm going through it to work on it. So I'm closing out the editing part now, and I think we'll be publishing that for them. It's going to be one of those books that I think will perennially sell well in the Adirondacks. A lot of people are just interested in that. You know, if you stayed in a lean-to, it's different. It's a different experience, and that's what he wants to write about. So that we expect will be a project we're completing later this year.
Okay.
And hopefully bootlegging.
Bootlegging.
Again, we've said this how many times on your show, but I get.
So where are you at?
Well, I'm on my way through tens of thousands of notes, piecing everything together to see what I have and how I can present it. The last time I looked before I got into this part of it it would probably be 4 of those. It was that big, you know. But you can't, so many people have stories, you just can't tell all those stories. There are literally thousands of interesting arrests, you know. When I say wild chases, well, if you've got 150 wild chases that went for 10 miles, bullets flying, cars crashing, you can't just keep retelling the same thing over and over. So you need context as well. And what I've loved discovering is how important Northern New York was to New York State bootlegging. And New York State bootlegging was the key to repealing prohibition. As New York went, so went most of the country. New York City was obviously key, and they had their booze coming in principally from 2 places. Offshore, back then there was actually a line of ships beyond the international boundary, and they would just stay out there loaded with, might be Bermuda rum, Canadian Seagrams. Oh, they were just waiting to, and what they would do sometimes is send in 8 or 10 boats, speedboats. So they knew the feds only had a couple of boats, so 6 of these are going to get in. So, you know, with the profit you're making, you might take the raw material, you might say, well, just keep adding water to it and extend it. It's just terrible, but everybody's buying it. That's how they did it. And the other source, especially when that began to be cut off, the main source was the Canadian land border. You know, the St. Lawrence River had a lot of bootlegging, but principally it was the land border. That was the big one. Massive amounts came across there.
Yeah, you think, well, because it's a wooded area, it's so easy to sneak a cow through or whatever, and of course the cars. And there wasn't much of a force up here to patrol.
No.
So it was it was wide open. And in case, you know, we all familiar up here now in our day and age of the Border Patrol stop around Hudson, you know, on the way downtown, that way down south.
Skern Lake?
Yeah.
Within 100 miles, they claim the right to search you.
So back then, there weren't a heck of a lot of roads, so a lot of people were stopped even beyond Plattsburgh on their way head down south to Glens Falls or Albany or wherever.
Yeah. I have details now on how there were several ways to bootleg, and I have details on each system where local guys might run it themselves. Others are running it for wheeler dealers in the area, made pretty good money, and then a lot of them were big money guys from the cities. And that introduced a new element. There was a lot more.
So where did most of your stories come from? Obviously, the word of mouth is no longer available. You know, we were fortunate 20 years ago, Bob, Ben, and I, to sit down with 3 guys who had been involved. But even then, they were in their 80s, and they were on the tail end of it. And, and in the case of one of them, his father did it, and he was 16 when Prohibition ended. So the people to tell live stories aren't around anymore. So most of it's at least a generation away if it's local stories.
Yeah. Well, I'd say the statute of limitations probably run out by now.
Oh yeah.
No, I'm thinking.
Where are you getting? What's your source?
I'm thinking of when I was younger, and I remember visiting Frankie Manette. Yeah, his name you'll find in a lot of newspapers back then. Vedettes. You know, we knew Dickie, but there's a long line of vedettes before him, very, very involved in that. You know, Eddie Favreau, of course, was.
Well, your mother, it's not like she was an actual bootlegger, and yet
she had one in her boot. She had one in her boot, according to your cousin Jerry.
Technically, she was.
There were a couple stories she told us. It was one where, you know, they lived near the Canadian border, so they would go over the border to shop all the time. And her parents would, you know, you got 4 little girls, and they all got little dresses on with pockets. They'd stuff little, like, bottles of booze in their little pockets to come back over the border.
Yeah.
And then
who hasn't done that with her
Larry
kids?
was talking about making booze, and he said something about the capper, and his mother's, oh yeah, you did this, and you went like this, and so come to find out, what, in the basement of that bar her
Sarah Busco Legree's.
grandparents owned or whatever?
My mom's a Legree. That's
They
her,
would make some kind of
her uncle.
booze,
Her uncle
and your mom was in charge of
bathtub gin.
operating the. Now, if she were here, knowing we're telling this story, she'd be thoroughly peeved. When Larry wanted to,
Watching you.
when Ken Burns did that whole Prohibition miniseries on PBS, the local PBS station, they were sort of scrambling. They said, "Oh, we really should do some kind of local." And so Larry was the first one they thought of. He said, "Well, I've done some research in it, but this is before he'd gotten heavily involved in the bootleg. But he did agree to go. It was kind of last minute." And we mentioned it to his mother that he was going to be doing the show. "Well, make sure you don't mention me." And I said, "Anna, what are you so worried about? You think the G-men are going to come get you now?" But she really was just so. I mean, most of us, like the younger generation, think it's cool to talk about bootlegging stories, but she was, I guess, ashamed of it. I don't know. She just don't tell anybody, don't mention my name.
You know?
But I'm thinking, no, people would think it's cool. They're not. No one's going to be ashamed of you. I think most people agree now, looking back on it, that Prohibition was just a bad idea. It was just, you can't, as they say, you can't legislate morality. People are going to do what they want to do, and when you make it illegal, most likely it's just going to turn into a crime thing, and that's just what happened. So I think most people agree it was really just
it's all about
not
money.
a good law at all.
Well, during Prohibition, there was actually smuggling of alcohol north.
It would go both ways.
That just sounds insane. But if you could get the raw materials cheaper here, you take it up to Canada, they make it into the booze you want, and then you smuggle it back in. This was a routine thing. And then when Prohibition ended, that was the big business. All of a sudden, because the U.S. was often fighting with Canada, we were at odds because they said, we're wet up here. We can make all the Seagrams and all the beer we want.
Yeah.
If somebody takes us out, it's not our problem.
Yeah.
Well, that reversed because when Prohibition was done, smuggling was heavy to the north, and they wanted cooperation from the United States. It didn't work out very well, but those are the kinds of things. And you mentioned the roads. That's very important. That back then there weren't that many paths. So you take 9B and 9. I don't know why they don't have historic signs all along there. Maybe they just don't know how important this was. But two of the main routes in New York State, that's where they are. And that's where there were a lot of shootings and a lot of captures. And then, through Plattsburgh, of course, one of the biggest places, a lot of the mobsters came up there because it's a good, it's a city. It's a better place to set up and do business and try to run things. So there was some really dangerous people up here, with multiple murders in their past and things like that. And then eventually, I've got coverage on some huge scandals up here. I think the part I don't like is that border lawmen probably won't be very happy with it. But when you analyze what happened over the course of 14 years, it's just, it's terrifying to think this is how Americans were being treated. But it's, the record shows what was going on. And it was, first thing you did, like if somebody broke the law, somebody stole a tricycle or, stole your wallet, I don't think the first reaction was to open fire and try to kill them. But back then, for alcohol,
you were running away. Like Eddie Favreau said, you got nipped. Shooting at him. He said, if we weren't armed, we were just
that's one thing. See,
trying to make an honest living, he said.
The lawmen would claim that all these bootleggers are armed, and the guys running the border, like Eddie, were told no weapons. Absolutely not.
Right.
And if they're using their own car, it's up to them what to do. But if you're using Calvin's, the smuggler, I'm driving for him, he'll say, if they're chasing you, dump it. Just get out of the car and run. Yeah. And there are hundreds and hundreds of instances where they captured the load, but not the driver. But there are also many where people were shot. Just, innocent people were shot too. They just opened fire on cars. And it was such a wild thing that Chateauguay and Malone area was constant uproar, because people were being shot at. People were, all your life, you just went out and, you rode your horse on the back roads, and now they had cars. You ride your car just for an evening ride. Well, people would open fire on you. And, they're just assuming if you're out here, you must be smuggling booze. And
shoot first and ask questions later.
Well, unfortunately, that was the case. Really not as much with the police. Troop B was formed here because of bootlegging. But they weren't known for it as much. It was federal officers. And, that sounds scary, but the problem a lot of the time was they were hiring these guys, and they were only 20 years old. They're really like, don't even have a full schooling yet, and their brains aren't fully formed yet, and you gave them a gun. And some of these guys really became sort of like cult heroes. But
because they got into it thinking this is what you want me to do.
Yeah.
So you want me to
I guess the problem is that nobody's ever looked at it year by year, incident by incident, and then say, here's what happened in 1921, 24, 26, and then you see patterns.
Well,
and
that could be your book.
It
You know,
becomes-
the first book would be 19 to
oh boy, I know.
22 or whatever, you know, and just
What happened to me was I started writing this well over a year ago, and I did complete. I wanted to do an annual review, so I did that. I used 1919, it begins with 1920, through the end of 33. So I wrote all those, and I said, I got some really good stuff in there. And it's not just what happens here, but it's how it relates to the state, how it relates to the country. Like, we never really think of ourselves as known nationally, but, when you got a guy in Morris Forks who's being named in Congress, in the Senate, they're discussing this guy, that's pretty important. Or in Parliament in Canada. So that happened several times. So I thought, that was very interesting. But to do that whole thing year by year, and I looked at it, I said, all right, this is a good start. And then when I totaled up the words, I realized it's bigger than some of the other books I've written. And that's just the beginning.
mm-hmm.
So, I'm enjoying parts where there are humorous or odd, unusual incidents. And one of the most fun parts will be the temporarily ingenious ways of smuggling. Just the ideas that you would come up with. Because, I've known a lot of people who have smuggled. I was invited to assist up in Moors a few times, and they pay you pretty good money for that.
This is not bootlegging he's talking about.
No, that's...
Well, no romance here.
But they were doing that back then, too. That was a really big business, smuggling aliens. Yeah.
Oh.
But it was mostly a ripoff, though, because they would smuggle you in, and then you'd say, I'm heading for New York City, and then... Now that you've let him go off to New York City, you stay in touch, and you say, well, if you don't keep sending me $50 a month, I'll probably have to tell somebody. And that's what they did. They blackmailed him, so they made loads of money that way.
Ouch.
Just a standard way of doing business. But it was the booze business was the biggest of all for that period. It was just tremendous. Some of the guys who did the best financially were the ones who stayed out of it personally. They ran it, but they didn't go across the line. They arranged.
Mm-hmm.
And one guy in Champlain, when I was younger, I'd say it's possible I may have attempted to purchase alcohol when I was underage.
Possible. And
it's possible someone sold it to me. And that person, it was funny because I didn't really know what I meant at the time. He said, oh, you've been dealing with that old bootlegger? Well, yeah, he was an old bootlegger, all right. I've got the records on it. And one of these guys in that family made a tremendous amount of money under the radar because he was smuggling. He would get, like, if you wanted maybe 50 or 80 cases of booze, you could get it through a car or a truck. He would arrange it, but he wouldn't be the driver. Nothing to do with that. And then he'd arrange to have it brought to a certain place. There were a lot of safe places all along the border. One of the first stops usually was Plattsburgh. A lot of people use their garages or an old barn, and you would store stuff there, and that's your distribution point south. So that was part of the real system of smuggling anyway for most of the people up north, was bringing it to a distribution point, like Eddie. That's what he used to do.
Yeah.
The guy hires him to bring it to Plattsburgh. Oftentimes from there it went to Albany or Glens Falls.
Yeah, and Eddie would told on camera that he'd spend many a night sleeping in my grandmother's couch because he hid his load in the hay barn and on the Ridge Road. That's where, where I live right now.
Your grandmother was aiding and abetting bootleggers?
Yes.
Well, did get a few dollars, you know. You got to remember that these people trying to eke out a living in the 20s and so on, a couple bucks.
So much per case is what the farmers got.
You get a couple bucks.
I think it's cool.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, you can also sympathize with these folks that they didn't. First of all, they didn't see anything wrong with it. That's like you're saying, you didn't see anything wrong. You don't see anything wrong with it either, but they didn't see anything wrong with it, so they didn't think it was a just law, and it might mean keeping the farm.
Yeah.
you know.
Oh, there were a lot of those.
Anybody who looks back on that time as being bad, they're probably just because they're only familiar with the big stories, like the gangster stories, like Al Capone and things like that. But most people, like you said, they could do a little here or there to be involved and make a little dough to try to keep up with things, and so be it.
Paid some bills.
Yeah, they weren't hurting anybody, and it was all going on. Like I said, you can't tell people totally how to live their lives when it comes to stuff like that. It's just not right. And people, if people really want to do it, they're going to find a way.
Well, they eventually discovered that was true. That yeah, this is just crazy. People are.
So this book is coming out when?
Well, you've asked me this on past shows,
The
and
first chapter, like I said, it can be
well,
4 books like this, you know.
So we've discussed
I'm
that,
just-
but it's always difficult
just-
to make a decision like that because, you know, every
Well, it doesn't,
book, you
doesn't
know,
come to an
every
end.
book costs a certain amount of money to produce, whether it's an entire story within one book or if it's a series. But then what do you charge? Because people aren't necessarily going to want to pay for a 2-volume set the same as they pay for 2 separate books. So it's hard to decide, okay, how do we do this, and do we put them out at the same time, or do you make it into some kind of series where, okay, you know, book 1 comes out this year, and then maybe, like his, you know, People in Places series, we try to put out a volume every year. And each is, and in that case, each is its kind of its own separate book, not any kind of serial, nothing in volume 7 is really related to volume 6, except that they're all about interesting historical stories within the Adirondacks and North Country. That's
Yeah,
the only
well, this here was easily 2 books, but you know, if you're buying it, you'd probably like to go to one source, you know, and
right. And then the other dilemma is, okay, do we make just this big monstrosity of a book that could be unweeded? So that's
Well, I think
been kind
each-
of our dilemma here is,
well,
okay,
each could
just how
stand
much-
alone, you know, if you had a time period, say, you know, from 1919 to
yeah, I
Right.
could do half.
1925, this is the story of what happened then. Then next time you put out from 26 to 33 or whatever, you know, you just.
So that's been, he's
Each
still
can
trying to get
stand
everything
alone, doesn't-
thoroughly organized and deciding what he's going to include.
Yeah, when
and
I
he's
see the
not.
volume and how much you know, what I can trim and what I don't want to trim, I am, just to impress upon people how pervasive it was, I'm having a section on each year where it's just going to be, at the end of the annual review, incidents from 1921. And it might be, you know, a truck was captured with 100 cases, and name names, of course, the people who were arrested. Difficult to get the names right, but there'll be hundreds and hundreds of names in there, and it's all part of the arrest record anyway. So there's nothing wrong with naming people.
Yeah, it's all
and,
publicly available.
you know, there's some.
information. It's not-
I don't think my mom would appreciate the Legrees from Cherubusco being in there, but you hate to omit them, you know.
Again, I think most
They
people
better.
think it's cool. I would think it's cool if I found out that some of my ancestors were involved in bootlegging.
Criminals, sure, who doesn't want?
Well, it's often, you know, and it includes a lot of unusual things. Like, people not from the border think there's a customs at the border. But, you know, through most of our lifetime, the customs house was nowhere near the borderline. You could get in, in Morse Forks, you'd cross the line, you had a choice of turning left and going over to a side road where I lived, and then loop back down and go over to the customs to report. You know, that's what people did. My grandfather told me what he used to do. And I think I said that on TV once. He said, yeah, I just drive in, go over by, well, the house was on the main drag. He said I'd drop off whatever I had in the ditch and just keep going right on down to customs to report. Now I got nothing to report. But, you know, and they also don't understand that for a lot of people, there was no border. You know, your mom lives there, your cousins, everybody, you're just back and forth
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I changed somewhat, but we did used to cross where the Meridian was. We crossed there a lot, and nobody ever bothered us. About
Okay.
fireworks. That's where we went up to get our fireworks, because they were illegal in New York State.
Mm-hmm.
We knew the word. Somebody taught us patow. Just ask for patow. And they knew what to sell us. I don't know if that's the correct word, but that's what they gave us, and yeah, it worked. So, but the border has changed a lot now, especially. You know.
Yeah, well, you know, you mentioned the Oak Street, that's where the Meridian was, and the Customs House was down on Elm Street across from the funeral home, so that's a mile and a half or
Oh,
so
way down
away
there.
from the border.
Yeah.
So, the border station wasn't necessarily on the border, as you're saying, so.
And like you said, they had establishment elsewhere because you can search people within 100 miles or so.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when I was a child in Whitehall, whatever the length of what's the Lake Champlain, like 90 miles?
Well, they usually say about 100, 110.
Yeah.
So we're right where the lake ends and the canal begins. They did have, I was still really young when it went out, so I don't know if it was supposed to be customs or border patrol or what it was, but I remember a couple of my school friends, their dads worked there.
Yeah,
When
those
it closed, they had to, because I remember one of my friends, she moved all the way down to Texas, I think. Another one, they actually moved to the Bahamas. But I'm guessing part of it was because the canal started there. So
Mhm.
they did have some sort of customs border patrol presence way down there in Whitehall.
Yeah, worried about stuff heading south,
Yeah.
not so much what's heading north, but heading south, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of bootleggers in Whitehall.
So the
Oh
bootleggers.
yeah, there were quite a few Whitehallers that they can trace their ancestors back to bootlegging. Apparently, one or two of the prominent families in Whitehall, the rich families, that's how they made their money.
Oh, and
Supposedly.
I think of criminals. I think of Whitehall myself.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I like
You're
the-
such a classy bunch in Champlain.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that I found with her from
They're
Whitehall.
touchy,
Me from,
very touchy, aren't they, in Whitehall?
a lot of the names
Actually,
that you'll see
a lot-
are
yeah.
the same as down
A
there.
lot of the people in
From the-
Whitehall came from Champlain,
Yes.
Calvin, so thank
Yeah.
you.
Working on the railroad.
That explains it.
Or the canal
And
boats.
the canal boats, yeah.
Yep. A lot of the people made their living on canal
Yeah,
boats,
yeah.
and they were
We
up
threw
and down the
we
lake.
threw them out, and they went down to Whitehall.
You'll mention names sometimes. I'm like, oh, that's a name. That's a name in Whitehall.
Well, sure. Yeah.
Lots of them.
So part of my research too is I need to learn how to drink. So, you know, I'm going to have to do a lot of drinking to prepare.
He started at 16,
So-
and he still hasn't
Well,
learned.
I quit long. I used to, but that was when I was a lot
You
younger.
have these other books over here. What?
Oh, that was if we needed to fill any time.
Oh, I wouldn't need to fill any time.
Well, I was coming up on this is early
Well, it's
May.
just that's the. I know. I think we've covered them all, but that's
Yeah.
the complete set available right now.
Available right now.
No, the
For a
only,
limited time only.
No. not
the
for-
reason I was mentioning it was back when I looked at social media, and I just don't have time for it. But I told Jill, I said, you know, I keep reading that you might want to have your business have a presence there back in 2010. Well, I made a mistake there. But anyway, she took a look at it. She decided this is a good idea. And then she decided I was going to write Today in History. Well, it involved a ton of research for every story. I couldn't keep
I
up.
thought it was a great idea.
But
Yeah,
within
today in history,
within
not
six
this week, but today.
yes, and
This-
In North Country history,
within
not just
6
history.
stories though, we had a contact from a guy, and he says, "I'd like you to write for me." He runs Adirondack Almanac. It is the #1 online journal in the Adirondacks. Now they're part of Adirondack Explorer. So back then, I told him I said I don't want to get assignments. I just like to write what I like to write about. Do what you want, as long as you can relate it somehow to the Adirondacks or the region, perfect. So I started in May 2010, so
You've done a
this
story
is my
every week.
8th anniversary now, actually, yeah, next week.
One
That
a
I-
week.
Yeah, I've written over 400 columns. Sometimes I'll write about the book business or about ebooks versus other things like that,
Or
but,
what you had
It's
for
mostly-
breakfast.
but no, I never do that.
No.
No, this isn't a blog. It's mostly hard history, like the ones I just covered this past week. A girl wrote a story in Adirondack Explorer about her favorite go-to mountain, and she picked Line Mountain. She said, you know, do a lot of hiking in the high peaks, but that one up north, here's why I love it. Well, it's always been my favorite, so I had a lot to add to that because I have a background there from, you know, back in the 60s and 70s. So I wrote about the experiences and about the cabin that used to be there is no longer there. That was a big drawing card. It was within 30 minutes of the top, the ranger station. And then the one I just ran this week is running right now is the history of the old trail. I actually have the history of that trail when it was first built. So all the details of Verplank Colvin went there for a survey. That was one of his key spots, was the top of Line Mountain. And then different people who built the trails back then and the history of it. And then it was finally abandoned
2009, I think.
somewhere around there. They built a new trail.
So these books here are
These books are
the best,
a collection of my stories on there.
the best of the stories.
Well, yeah, they wouldn't be the book stuff, but it'll be all of his history that I've written. A lot of Champlain stuff. I think I told you one of my favorites was on the Mission Center. I could actually research her life story. Really amazing woman.
Rita.
I worked for her. I told you I worked for Rita for years up there, but she had an amazing story. What a life. She did so much good. Most people will never come close to doing that
You
much
should at
good.
least put them here so people
But
can see them.
anyway, that's what the series.
You didn't get into her Rita Lombard's bootlegging days. So
No.
No, we kept that secret.
You've
We're saving
spoiled
that
it.
for the bootlegging.
You've tainted her name now.
There she is.
She's probably she's on the cover.
Right there, right there.
Amazing.
We must have talked about Volume 7 on the
Yeah.
last show.
So
I'm sure I have
when's
enough-
I'm sure
volume
he's
8
got enough
coming?
material for
Well,
Volume 8, we
it-
just haven't gotten around to
It
it.
should be out now, but I've been too busy.
We should have put it, we've been trying to do, he did the first 4 volumes right close together, and then we've done a volume every year since, except last year we didn't because we were just too swamped.
Too successful to.
Well, the first story I did on Almanac, I did history almost all the time. The first story I did was called something like with a question mark, Poco Rushmore. You know, I try to do original stuff, not
Oh,
something somebody else has done.
That's original. I've never heard. Poco
Well,
Rushmore.
what they were doing in the 1930s, there was a movement, George Clinton, in New York history, one of the most famous and revered names. And somebody decided it would be a great idea, just like on Rushmore, to take Poca Moonshine and carve his likeness on there. And a lot of people supported it. it was going to be a big deal. Parts of it passed through the legislature, but a lot of groups came out against it as well. And eventually they put the stops to it. But it could have been, it was in the works to be done. So I told that was my very first one.
So we could be driving down the Northway and looking at Local Rushmore?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the second one I did was on Chateauguay, the racehorse. I remembered that, and I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
I've got to know the whole story. And it turns out, you probably remember the guy Galbraith. He used to own the Pirates, Pittsburgh Pirates. He had an financial interest in Mineville and Line Mountain. So traveling through there, he's up in the Chateauguay area, and he said, man, make a nice name for a horse. He named the horse Chateauguay, and the horse won the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont. The Preakness is second, right? Yeah, the Preakness is second. Lost that one by 3.5 lengths, but won the two others. And then they had on display a letter that he wrote because Chateauguay was so excited about it. He wrote a letter to them, about why he named the horse that. It's kind of a neat story. Nobody had heard it, so that's kind of history I've written that's in those
Did
books.
you also, wasn't there a,
7 volumes so far.
they were possibly going to do a cog railway on Whiteface?
Yeah, I did that one.
That was one of your early stories, I
Yep.
think.
There are how many stories in each of these volumes?
24 to 32, depending. Some,
On the length of the stories.
yeah, I've got a few that are.
They're all
I
200
call my
pages.
anchor stories. They might be 30 or 40 pages, but most of them, jokingly, I probably shouldn't say this, right, Joe? Jokingly, I would call it like a bathroom book because you can sit and read
You
a
can read a chapter while you
two-page story
do
or
your business.
three-page story. And most of it's history you've never heard of. Some of it's humors, but it's all true. There's all kinds of things.
Okay.
And I put all the, we have people looking at them, all the subjects are on the back of each book. So they can find that on our website. They can view all the stories there.
So
Or
you can see if
view
it's
the
something
titles.
that they might be interested in.
That's one of the problems is, people don't realize how much they would enjoy this. Instead, they look for, is there something about my town?
Right, because we see, like,
And-
volume 1 around here, volume 1 seems to sell like crazy.
And this is 6. This has Benny Rolfe from Brazier Falls. This guy was fantastically famous in New York City, became a great musician, told his whole story in there. Hogpen Charlie is one of my favorites. This is a guy who was locked up at Dannemora in Clinton prison, and he eventually they had farming added on to the prison to be self-sufficient, and he ran the hog area. And after a while, he's released, and he'd get arrested again for something, get sent back to Dannemora, and he started asking, can I have the same job back? And he became known as Hogpen Charlie. And I document, I can't remember how many, 7 or 8 times he was sentenced to prison. He spent most of his life in different prisons. And he was just, that's a little piece of history that no one had heard of. So those are the types of things that are in there.
Okay.
I'm talking too much, right?
Don't ask
Okay.
Jill. She'll.
I think you always know the answer to that question.
Okay. Anything else that we should mention here? Again, we're talking Bloated Toe with Jill Jones and
Lawrence P. Gooley.
Lawrence P. Gooley, the
Okay.
illustrious.
That's thanks to our nuns. You remember what the
That's
nuns
the-
told you? You write a book, you use your real name.
And then what did you do for the first book
For
you
the
wrote?
first book I
That's what
put,
they
Larry
told
Gooley.
Mark Twain. That's what they told Mark Twain and
well, what did I put? I put Larry on the first one.
Larry.
Because I was always Larry, and I
Well,
just
you
felt
were.
Lawrence sounded awful, but
Well, too
then,
presumptuous. Yes.
yeah, but then you realize for all the records in the Library of Congress, you're supposed to have your
Well.
real name.
Well, sure.
So, so I'd become Lawrence to a lot of people.
Well, Rich always puts Richard.
But we get the celebrity treatment, so.
He goes by Rich, but he always puts Richard B. Frost on his books.
But you go elsewhere and they treat you like you're somebody. Like, oh, wait, we got this author to come here, going to carry everything for you. And it's just,
No,
no.
that's what I got her for.
Yeah, I got a mule. Yeah.
No, I make him do the
Oh,
heavy.
yeah.
Oh, geez.
All right.
It's man's work.
Okay. Anything else that we should talk about here while we're here? Because we're probably not going to do this again for another
Wait another
12,
year.
13 months.
Or
Hopefully.
maybe when the bootlegging
next
comes out in
time,
the
yeah.
fall.
Well,
Next
that's going to be
show
6
we'll-
years.
I,
before
yeah, well,
the bootleg comes out in the fall. Give me a break.
hopefully, but that's going to be tough.
Stop inviting them to give talks so you can stay here
Yeah.
and work.
Well, we do have, we have book events. We've got the one in Long Lake. That's the biggest one of the year, Glens Falls.
I'm going to call them up, both of them, and tell them you're canceling. You're
Yeah.
too busy.
No, at least the Long Lake in Glens Falls, you doesn't have to talk. We just stand there and sell books.
Just stand
Those are
there
just
and
book fairs.
take bows. And
Fans.
Yeah.
Fans come to see. Can you imagine that?
Fans.
It
Oh,
must
I
be
love
like
your word.
last week William Shatner was in
Yeah.
Ticonderoga at the
Yeah,
Star
it's
Trek
like that.
thing there. It must
Yeah, it's
be,
just like that.
must be when you show up.
It's
the
almost
same
exactly like that.
Almost like 1,500 a head to get in. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, people pay $1,500 to hear Larry talk.
We've done 5 a few times, but they were great. Oh, you came all the way from Syracuse.
And I tell everyone the same thing. I'm like, I can't believe you guys pay him to talk.
Hey.
I'd pay him to shut up.
People came all the way from Syracuse to Blue Mountain Lake, and then some of them
They
got
got
turned
locked
away.
out because it was
And they were
built in
paying $5.
capacity.
Paying
Yeah.
$5 and they
Yeah.
still got turned away.
So I did it at Wells a year later, and packed house again, and yeah.
Well, after the thing, he went out in the parking lot and people handed him $5 and he talked to them, right?
And then he gets mad usually when he's giving the talk. You know, I get the computer all set up for him and make sure it's all working, and then I'm nearby in case anything goes wrong. But usually while he's talking, I'm doing stuff on my phone or whatever. And then he was like, "Did you hear me say that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I wasn't really listening."
Uh-oh.
And he gets mad. I'm like, "I've heard you rehearse the thing like 1,000,000 times. I
You know
have
what
to listen
You're,
to it
you're
live
gonna
too."
ruin the camera's still running here, you know.
You know what she
You're
tells
gonna ruin
everybody?
the image.
You know what she
I'm
tells
being
everybody?
honest.
Oh, I look up when I hear a pause, like, uh-oh, did he
Yeah.
forget?
Yeah,
Yeah. And then she says, no, he's talking
normally he's
again.
just, da 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 da. So if there's a pause of more than a second or two, I'm like, uh-oh, did you forget it? Did you lose his train of thought? Did the computer go blank? What's going on?
Well, I've got, usually about 100 images and a remote control, so I can just pace around, and as the images, I change them, and I just talk to the image and whatever I have to say about it. So it's all from memory. So it's a lot of work, though. It really is. But
I'm
you,
sure.
you hope those things will trigger your memory, because if you forget, it's pretty embarrassing. But we got paid once to do it for businessmen from Syracuse, and it's supposed to be an audience of 3.
3.
Paid the full price and put us up overnight in one of the great camps in the Adirondacks. Imagine that, right on the lake.
I want to read about it in
That's fantastic.
chapter 9.
And gourmet chef. Well, I think I had salmon that night. I don't know what you had, but yeah, they brought the chef in just to cook for us and these 3 guys.
I
That's pretty
can't
cool.
tell you how many times that's happened to Judy.
Yeah, but when you're from redneck country, one of the most exciting things is you go in and one of these other buildings, and they got pool tables and everything. They said, oh yeah, all the snacks, they're packed with chips and ice cream sandwiches. Yeah, eat anything you want, as much as you want.
Sorry, it's
Yeah, like-
just like he just
The
got
salmon was good, but
Free food, man. You gotta fill up on
filling
Ah.
his pockets. I can just see him.
Well, not with ice cream sandwiches. That would
no,
be
no,
a mess,
no.
but-
That's the chips.
that's crazy.
Must be embarrassing for you.
But they were on vacation, the 3 guys, and they wanted me for entertainment.
I know.
I know. Without her support, I could not do this.
How dull are your lives? You know what would be exciting? Let's go to the woods and listen to Larry Gooley talk for 2 hours.
This is the highlight.
The camera's not running, is it?
No, the camera's off. Judy just sitting
Yeah.
there. But we'll come back on now, Judy. Okay,
Yeah.
we're coming
You'll edit
back.
that part out, right?
We're coming back on now. The camera's been off. You missed a lot of stuff here.
Yeah,
So I think we're going to wrap it up. Is that okay?
sure.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Is that all right?
This is a high point. Good time to do it.
All
Now
right.
that we've thoroughly demoralized Larry, let's shut it
All
down.
right. So if you want to see except for Richard Frost's book and Melissa
I mean,
Peck,
it's on the website,
and Melissa Peck.
but it just links over to CCHA, so you can
I
contact
can't,
them.
can't forget Melissa. She's a lot cuter than Richard Frost. Except for that one. All these books are available, and you can get an idea what they're about by going to the Bloated Toe, Toe,
BloatedToe.com.
like a toe,
Yep.
not as a toe in your car.
And for all the books, we also include whether they're available for online purchase or if they're in stores. You can see a list of the stores where they should be. I always preface that with make sure to call the store, because sometimes the stores don't contact us when they're out of stock on something, so we don't have any way of knowing.
Yeah.
Selling like hotcakes.
You know, so
Yeah.
we always recommend, unless you're going to that store anyway, call first. Don't make a
Yeah,
special
don't-
trip to find out the book might be out of stock. We try to keep everything stocked, but again,
Yeah.
we just go when we can. If they contact us and tell us they're out of something, we get there right away, but they don't always do that.
Yeah, and we're in the area, Kinney's and in Bookburg at the mall, so you can
Yeah,
find
I
them
think,
there,
yeah,
too.
all the Plattsburgh Kinneys have a bunch of our books.
And
CCHA, if you want to get this book, they
Champlain
have,
Kinney's.
CCHA has several of our books
we're
as well.
in Lake Placid, Saranac Lake, and E-Town.
E-Town.
And in Rouse's Point.
Yeah, Cornerstone and Rouse's Point, and also Kinney and Champlain.
And don't forget Cherubusco.
And Dick's Country Store and Music Oasis.
And a few
And
in Bill's Bait
Bill's
and Beer
Bait and Beer.
in Brainersville.
Yeah.
A lot of these.
Oh,
And
really?
the
I
Mountain
don't know.
Mart, and that's in Moore's, right?
I-
Or Altona.
That's the place there when you You go through, take the 11B, and well, not 11B, but that
24. It goes, it goes
yeah.
over to Malone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a heavily traveled road.
He gets a lot of business there.
Well, I'll have to stop.
You know,
stop
it's
into
it's a
Bill's
remote
Bait
location,
and-
but there's not much else around, and a lot of people, he's
Right
one of
to
the
Four
ones that did
Corners.
tell us that because we put on our website that he has certain books, he has had people come up from Malone because they saw on our website that, he has it, so they drive into Bill's and
He's
get the
just a
book.
little west of the
Right
Four
there.
Corners. Yeah, you gotta turn a little
Well,
bit.
just barely, but right at, I call it the Four Corners.
There's nothing else here except the
But
post
the
office.
Mountain
so-
Martin Moors, that's in, right?
Yeah, we have some
They
there
have
too.
some more.
Well,
books.
can't forget them. Okay. So thank you very much.
And Maggie's Marketplace.
and
in
Maggie's
Dannemora,
Market
they
in
have a bunch of
Dannemora.
books as well.
They might buy the Escape from Dannemora right there in Dannemora. What could be more fitting
I know.
than
Oh,
to
yeah,
go to
that's-
Maggie's Market in Dannemora?
That's why we were
It's-
surprised when Ben Stiller bought the book online when he had
Sarah-
just been there.
That and the Saranac Country Store.
Oh, Saranac Country
She
Store,
carries
yes.
several
She
of
has
them there,
several
and
too.
we've sold very well. Yeah, a lot of corrections officers wanted to buy those. So.
So if your store wasn't mentioned, maybe.
It's on our, again, everything, all the stores are on our website, both in this area and beyond.
Okay. Now can I stop?
Yeah.
I guess
Okay,
so.
okay. Now.
We'll allow it.
All right. We've been at the Bloated Toe Publishing Enterprises. Bloated Toe Enterprises. Don't put publishing in there because they won't find you, right? You gotta pull Bloated Toe Enterprises.
I think if you
It's one of our
if you were to
DBAs.
Google either Bloated Toe Enterprises or Bloated Toe Publishing, you'd find
You'll
it.
find
Right.
it. Bloated Toe, you'll find us.
Okay, and they've got a lot of online presence and a lot of books. The latest of which is Dannemora's Death House, and of course, the Escape from Dannemora. You got the Terror in the Adirondacks. They publish other things like the. Has Bob Garrow done 2 baseball books?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
2 baseball books from the real Bob Garrow,
Yep.
not that
Yeah.
guy that was the Terror in the
And his books
Adirondacks.
are on our website as well as in various stores locally.
So all that stuff, feel free to visit there, and if people want to catch you every week online,
AdirondackAlmanac.com.
Adirondack
And it's Almanac with a K.
Yeah.
So kind of
Adirondack with a K and a
Adirondack
almanac
Almanac with a K. Yep.
with
Yeah.
a K.
Yeah, if you search that, you'll find it.
With a CK.
Right. Just look for Lawrence P. Gooley, and
Exactly.
all kinds of things will pop up. Thank you, Judy, for running the camera. You're watching viewer-supported local television, hometown cable, and we thank you for watching.